I didn't scream when Cole Harrington told me my role no longer aligned with the company's vision. I just sat there, feeling that cold, humiliating burn spread through my chest as the clock on his wall read 5:12 p.m., less than 24 hours before my 8-year cliff. They thought they'd timed it perfectly, that I'd walk out quietly while they saved themselves a fortune. What they didn't know was that the real countdown had already started, and the power they believed they'd stolen wasn't gone at all. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you would have done. When Cole Harrington's assistant emailed me at 4:58 p.m. asking if I could step into the COO's office for a quick alignment, I already knew what was waiting on the other side of that glass door. Nobody in corporate America calls you into a meeting that late in the day to hand you a promotion or a bonus. I walked down the hallway slowly, pretending I hadn't noticed the way people were avoiding eye contact, pretending I didn't feel the air shift around me like the building itself was bracing for impact. When I stepped into Cole's office, the first thing I noticed wasn't him. It was the desk. Too clean, not a single paper out of place, not even a laptop charger. And then, sitting right in the center, a thin folder with my name printed on the tab. He didn't even bother looking up when I sat down. He just inhaled like he was about to give a presentation, not dismantle the life I'd built for the past 8 years. "Layla," he said, finally meeting my eyes, "we've made some decisions regarding the restructuring after the VectorCore merger. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated effective today." Effective today. My ears caught the words, but my mind clamped onto something else entirely. The date on his wall calendar, June 13th, one day before my 8-year vesting cliff, one day before $3.6 million in equity fully became mine. One day, that was the part that hit like a punch to the sternum. Not the firing, not the corporate jargon he was reciting from a script. I'd survived worse. It was the timing, surgical, precise, calculated. I felt my back press into the mesh of the ergonomic chair, the kind that always left a faint pattern on my skin. He kept talking about redundancies and strategic direction, but his voice faded into a low hum behind the pounding in my ears. I'd built the predictive load balancing engine this company sold to Fortune 500 clients. I'd slept under my desk during the worst outages. I'd saved their flagship product launch twice, and now I was being clipped off the payroll like a loose thread, simply because my equity was about to cost them too much. When he stood up, signaling the meeting was over, I noticed the slightest tightening in his jaw, as if he expected me to break down, or beg, or lash out. But I didn't move, not yet. I just stared at him. Long enough for his confidence to falter, long enough for him to shift his weight like he'd suddenly realized he might have miscalculated something. "HR will meet you at your desk," he added, softer this time. As I walked out of the office, every step felt both detached and electric, like my body was running on split-second survival instinct. The corridor looked different. The light harsher, the silence heavier, and there she was, Kara from HR, standing beside my desk with a cardboard box and that pre-packaged sympathy expression they must teach in training. The box smelled like dust, glue, and cheap recycled paper. I began placing my things inside mechanically. My chipped coffee mug, my dying desk plant, the sticky note I'd left on my monitor 2 years earlier for a meeting I no longer remembered. Kara hovered like she expected me to steal the monitor on my way out. For a moment, I almost laughed. They had no idea that the thing they were trying to steal from me had already slipped through their fingers. Not yet fully, but soon, very soon. And as I took the elevator down, clutching the cardboard box that held the remains of 8 years of loyalty, the only thought in my mind was simple, sharp, and cold. They think I'm powerless. They're wrong. The moment I reached my car, I tossed the cardboard box into the passenger seat, shut the door, and just sat there gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. The anger didn't come first. What came was the kind of numbness that makes everything around you feel slightly muffled, like the world is happening behind a thick pane of glass. I stared at the dashboard clock blinking 5:32 p.m. and forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, until the panic settled into something clearer, sharper. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the contact I knew I needed. Ava Sterling, my attorney, The one person I trusted enough to send a message that simply said, "It happened." Her response came seconds later, two words that sliced through my shock like a wire pulled tight. "Check clause." I knew exactly which clause she meant. 10 years ago, after my second startup collapse, I walked into Ava's office with a cheap laptop, a stack of unpaid bills, and a job offer from NovaForge that looked good on paper, but carried too many traps hidden in the fine print. I'd been naive back then, tired, broke, and desperate not to lose another chance at stability. If Ava hadn't insisted on reading every sentence of that employment contract with the scrutiny of a surgeon prepping for heart surgery, I would have never noticed the line buried in Clause 11A. Equity vests at the end of the employee's shift on the anniversary date. End of shift. That phrase was a loaded gun pointed at future me, and Ava had seen it instantly. She crossed it out, wrote "Start of calendar day" (1) in her steady penmanship, and made NovaForge's legal team initial the change. They probably thought it was meaningless, some semantic preference from an overcautious attorney. They didn't understand that Ava had spent a decade drafting contracts for companies that weaponized timing against employees. They didn't understand that she'd built her entire independent practice around making sure people like me never got cornered again. So when Ava texted me, "Check clause," I opened my cloud drive, pulled up the scanned copy of the contract she'd emailed me years ago, and zoomed in on that handwritten edition. The ink was still crisp. The initials from their attorney were still there. The timestamp from the document log was still intact. And that was when the numbness finally broke. Not into panic, into clarity. If the clause was valid, then my equity didn't vest at the end of June 14th. It vested at the first second of June 14th, midnight, which meant I wasn't one day away from vesting. I was 7 hours away, 7 hours from $3.6 million legally becoming mine, even though Cole had fired me that afternoon. I reread the clause 3 times, letting the words settle like armor forming around my ribs. A quiet, controlled anger took root. They really thought they could outmaneuver me. They really believed that firing a woman at 5:12 p.m. on the eve of her cliff would erase everything she'd built. But Ava had given me something stronger than loyalty or trust. She'd given me foresight. I started the engine and drove home through a haze of brake lights and evening traffic, each mile pulling me closer to midnight. Everything they thought they'd taken from me was still waiting on the other side of the clock. And the moment the hour turned, the game would no longer be theirs. It would be mine. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the silence felt unnatural, like the whole place was holding its breath with me. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter without even looking inside it. None of those things mattered right now. Only the clock did. I kept glancing at the oven display, 7:42 p.m., as if staring hard enough would pull midnight closer. I tried to distract myself by making dinner, but the knife felt awkward in my hand, like my body was running on muscle memory while my mind lived somewhere else entirely. I ended up leaving everything half prepped on the cutting board before pacing to the living room with my laptop. I opened the equity portal even though I knew nothing would update yet. The interface loaded slowly like it always did, spinning and lagging as if whoever built it had intentionally designed it to test human patience. I checked the vesting schedule, still showing pending. I refreshed. Nothing. I refreshed again. Nothing. At 9:03 p.m., Ava called. "Don't obsess over it," she said, which was hilarious because she knew damn well that was exactly what I was doing. "They can't touch anything. The clause is ironclad." "They'll try," I said quietly, watching the page time out for the 5th time. "Of course they will," she replied, "but tonight they can't. Tonight the system does the work for us." After we hung up, I walked a slow circuit through my apartment, unable to sit still. My heart kept lurching every time I looked at the clock. 10:21, 10:56, 11:14, each minute dragging like it was wading through mud. By the time 11:57 rolled around, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, laptop in front of me, feeling like every nerve in my body was vibrating. I kept telling myself not to get my hopes up, not to assume victory before it happened, not to make midnight into a promise. But when the minute flipped to 11:59, something inside me steadied, like my mind locked into place. I placed my finger on the trackpad and waited. The moment the clock on my screen hit 12:12 a.m., I refreshed the page. The loading animation spun so long I thought my breath would crack in my throat. And then the numbers changed. Vested, 100%. Updated, June 14th, 0 day 01. Shares, $148,000. Value, $3,112,440. I stared at the screen, unblinking, as relief and disbelief collided in my chest, so hard it almost hurt. Then I took a screenshot, then another, then downloaded the full statement, duplicated it, backed it up to 2 drives, emailed it to myself, and sent it to Ava with the subject line, "It's done." Her reply came back less than a minute later. "Beautiful. Do nothing else. Let them panic in the morning." I closed my laptop and exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. They thought they'd fired me in time, but time had just proven them wrong. By the time Monday morning arrived, I'd barely slept. Not because I doubted the vesting, those numbers were branded into my mind like coordinates, but because I knew how the next part of the game worked. Companies like Nova Forge didn't stay quiet when millions slipped through their fingers. They lunged. The first call came at 9:04 a.m. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, screen lighting up with Cole Harrington's name. I let it ring until it stopped, watching it like it was something behind glass in a museum. At 9:11 he called again. At 9:17 I received a text that read, "Need to discuss separation paperwork? Urgent." Urgent. That was the word they always used when they realized a trap they set had snapped on their own hand. I ignored that too. I made coffee instead. The mug shook slightly in my grip, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally seeing their arrogance crack. At 9:23, my email pinged. It was from Ava. She'd already sent the formal letter to Marianne Locke, Nova Forge's general counsel. Ava didn't write angry emails. She wrote documents that felt like the legal version of a scalpel. Precise, cold, lethal. She attached screenshots of the portal, the timestamp, the contract page with the handwritten revision, and a closing paragraph that could slice a titanium wall. Ms. Marston's equity vested at 00101 on June 14th under the clear and unambiguous terms of Clause 11A. Her subsequent termination approximately 17 hours later does not negate her vested rights. I read her letter twice, letting the professionalism of it settle me. Then my phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I rejected it. 30 seconds later, a voicemail came through. I hit play. "Ms. Marston, this is Marianne Locke from Nova Forge. I received correspondence from your counsel this morning. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding the interpretation of your vesting schedule. Please return my call so we can resolve this amicably." Amicably. That's what people say when they're standing on a structure that's already crumbling and trying not to look down. I didn't respond. Let them sweat. Let them wonder how much I knew. Because in truth, I knew more than they feared. Ava had warned me from the start that the company would try framing the situation as a confusion, hoping I'd fold under pressure. They didn't understand that pressure was the only reason I'd survived the industry this long. By late morning, the tone shifted from polite to strained. Emails came in one after another. Cole, his assistant, someone from HR, and finally Marianne again, this time with follow-up urgently requested in the subject line. I was stirring sugar into a fresh cup of coffee when another voicemail landed. "Layla, this is extremely time-sensitive. Failure to communicate could result in escalated action on our end." Escalated action. I almost laughed. They were bluffing, and badly. Ava called shortly after noon. "They're scrambling," she said, sounding almost cheerful. "This is exactly the response we expected. Don't answer anything, don't reply. Wait them out." "How long until they move past panic and into aggression?" I asked. "Any minute now." She was right. At 1:42 p.m., an email arrived from Marianne with the company's first attempt at pressure. A reminder that I remained bound by corporate policies regarding equity handling. At 2:10 p.m., another. "We request confirmation of your equity status as discrepancies have arisen." Discrepancies. They still couldn't say the truth out loud. And then came the one that made my throat tighten. Not from fear, but from the sheer predictability of it. At 3:05 p.m., NovaForge sent a PDF labeled Settlement Offer. They offered me $1.1 million, less than a third of what I was owed, in exchange for signing an NDA, surrendering all claims, and agreeing not to challenge their interpretation of the contract. A countdown timer was included in the email, like this was some kind of promotional sale. Offer expires in 48 hours. Ava's response was immediate when I forwarded it to her. Ignore it. They're trying to scare you. I closed my laptop. The room felt still, like air before a storm. Monday had barely ended, and already the cracks in their confidence were widening. They thought they were tightening the noose. They didn't realize they were pulling it around their own necks. I thought I understood the shape of the fight on Monday. Panic, emails, threats, lowball offers. I'd expected all of that. What I didn't expect was the message that showed up on my phone Tuesday morning at 8:19 a.m. It was from a number I didn't recognize at first, but the moment I saw the name, a faint chill ran through me. Maya Delaney. We weren't close, but we'd shared enough late nights during the VectorCore integration, debugging failures, fixing crashes, eating cold takeout side by side, that I knew she wasn't someone who reached out without a reason. Her text was short, almost too short for the weight it carried. Did they fire you before your cliff? Same thing happened to Leo last year. For a second, I just stared at the screen, my pulse slowing into something heavy. Leo. I remembered him, soft-spoken, brilliant, always the last one to leave the office. He'd been abruptly let go 8 days before his vesting, and everyone whispered that it must have been performance-related, even though his performance had always been spotless. My stomach turned in a slow, nauseating roll. I called Maya immediately. Her voice came through low, like she was talking from a closet. I shouldn't say anything, she began, but I can't stop thinking about what they did to you, and what they did to Leo, and Brianna before him. Brianna, I repeated, feeling something cold click into place behind my ribs. And Marcus, she added, and Tessa, all fired right before their vesting dates. All told, it was restructuring. Every single one walked away with less than they were owed. I felt the room tilt slightly, the air thickening. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because they were scared, she whispered. Because they were offered enough to stay quiet. Because the company made them feel like fighting wasn't worth the risk. I closed my eyes, letting the names swirl around me like ghosts. Leo, Brianna, Marcus, Tessa. They weren't coincidences, they were casualties, and I was about to be the fifth. After the call, I sat on my couch with my phone on my lap, staring at the blank television screen like it might suddenly reveal the truth. I thought about Leo's last day, how he'd packed his things in stunned silence while HR hovered. I remembered how Brianna disappeared so suddenly that people assumed she'd left voluntarily. And Marcus. He joked for months that he was counting minutes until his cliff, only to vanish right before it hit. Those memories felt different now, sharper, more sinister. NovaForge hadn't simply cut costs, they'd been hunting their own. I called Ava. She didn't sound surprised when I told her. She just sighed, a deep, knowing exhale that told me she'd seen this pattern in too many other companies. This changes everything, she said. This isn't just a contract dispute anymore. This is a deliberate strategy to deprive employees of earned compensation. Can we prove it? I asked. We can try, she said. Start with getting me names and dates, anything you remember. And Layla, this could turn into something bigger than you. Bigger than me. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. I hadn't asked to become anyone's symbol. I'd only wanted to keep what I'd earned. But when I thought of Leo, his quiet smile, his endless patience, when I imagined Brianna signing some paper she didn't fully understand because nobody had stood up with her, something inside me hardened. If they had fired me the way they'd fired the others, then maybe I would have signed too. Maybe I would have walked away believing I had no choice. But I wasn't alone this time. I had Ava. I had the clause. I had evidence they didn't know I had. And now I had names. I opened a new note on my phone and began typing them out, one after another, like I was writing the first page of a ledger. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was theirs too. And for the first time since Friday afternoon, I felt something stronger than fear settle in my chest, a sense of purpose. Nova Forge thought they'd cut me cleanly out of their books. They didn't realize I was about to turn the lights on and reveal the pattern they'd been hiding in the dark. Ava moved faster than I thought humanly possible. By Wednesday afternoon, she'd already filed a demand for arbitration that laid out every detail: the timing of my firing, the contract language, the midnight vesting, and the pattern of employees pushed out right before their cliffs. I expected Nova Forge to stonewall, to hide behind lawyers and corporate jargon, to drag their feet until we lost momentum. What I did not expect was how quickly their facade began to peel away once actual discovery was triggered. It started with a single document, a Slack export. Ava's team pulled after Nova Forge tried arguing that my termination had been unrelated to vesting. The file contained thousands of messages, most of them harmless: project updates, troubleshooting threads, lunch plans. But then, buried deep in a private leadership channel, there was one message that made my blood thrum in my ears. It was from Cole. Reminder: Marston Cliff 614, full payout unnecessary based on org restructuring plan. Coordinate timing accordingly. Coordinate timing accordingly. I must have read those words 20 times before calling Ava. She didn't even sound surprised. "We knew they were sloppy," she said. "I didn't expect them to be this sloppy." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came in the form of an audio memo, something I never would have believed existed if I hadn't heard it with my own ears. A junior HR analyst, nervous and shaky, had recorded it during a leadership sync. In the background, papers. Shuffled, chairs scraped, and then Cole's voice came through clear as glass. "We can't keep carrying senior engineers past vesting. It's too expensive. And frankly, most of them don't show the adaptability we need long term." A woman, Marianne, I think, asked, "Is this related to the gender balance issue we discussed?" Cole hesitated. "Well, patterns happen. As long as the documentation is tight, there shouldn't be exposure." Patterns happen. My hands clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. They hadn't just targeted senior engineers, they'd targeted women. Women like Brianna, women like Tessa, women like me. The next piece of evidence landed Thursday morning. Ava's investigator forwarded a chain of emails between Cole and Marianne dated 3 months earlier. "Have legal review Marston's contract for vulnerabilities," Cole wrote. "We need to avoid triggering her vesting event." Marianne replied, "We can explore shifting her responsibilities to justify redundancy. Termination window should be no later than June 13th. She even time-stamped it with a smiley face emoji. I felt something inside me break. Not the kind of break that makes you crumble, but the kind that sharpens you. A clean fracture, a new edge. I had expected corporate cruelty. I had not expected documentation of corporate cruelty sealed with a smile. When Ava came over that afternoon, with her laptop, her legal pad, and that laser-focused calm she saved for cases she intended to win, she laid everything out across my dining table like evidence in a trial. Slack messages, emails, notes, voice memos, patterns. "This," she said, tapping the printed memo with a manicured nail, "is a smoking gun. They've handed us proof of coordinated firing to avoid equity obligations. That's wrongful termination, breach of contract, and systemic discrimination. They didn't just expose themselves, they lit the match." I stared at the pile of documents, each one a piece of truth they never expected to see daylight. "Will this be enough?" I asked quietly. "This," she said, sitting back, "is more than enough. They thought they were cutting you out quietly. Instead, they documented a conspiracy." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and electric. Conspiracy. For 8 years, I had worked in those halls, believing competence was currency, believing loyalty mattered, believing that if I kept my head down and did the work, I'd be safe. But now I knew the truth. I'd been working in a system designed to use people like me until we were no longer convenient, and they had left the receipts. I leaned back in my chair, adrenaline and disbelief coursing together. What happens next? Ava smiled, cold and precise. Next, we make them answer for every name on your list. And for the first time since they fired me, I felt the balance shift. Not in whispers or small signs, but in a tidal pull. They were no longer hunting me. I was coming for them. I walked into the conference room on the 43rd floor with a calm so sharp it almost felt unreal, like stepping into a moment I'd already lived in my mind a dozen times. The room was polished within an inch of its life. Glass walls, a long walnut table, the skyline of Seattle stretching out behind the executives who had tried to carve me out of their future. Cole Harrington sat at one end, shoulders tight, suit wrinkled in a way that betrayed how little sleep he'd had. He didn't look at me. Marianne Locke was there too, her legal pad open, though her hand hovered over her pen like she wasn't sure what to write anymore. Two other lawyers flanked them, stiff and silent. Ava sat beside me, composed as ever, her presence steadying me more than anything she could have said aloud. Marianne cleared her throat first. "Ms. Marston," she began, "we believe there may have been misunderstandings surrounding your departure and equity status. We'd like to discuss a comprehensive resolution." Misunderstandings. The word hit the table with a dull, pathetic thud. Ava folded her hands. "We're listening." Cole finally lifted his eyes, and the sight of me, calm, unshaken, fully in control, seemed to rattle him more than anything. "We're prepared," he said, voice clipped, "to grant full access to your vested shares, effective immediately, as well as severance compensation." It was everything they'd refused to acknowledge days earlier, said now in a voice that sounded like it had been sanded down by humiliation. A document slid across the table. I didn't reach for it. "And the NDA?" Ava asked. Marianne hesitated. "Standard confidentiality?" "No," I said, cutting clean through her sentence. Cole's head snapped up, startled. "I will not sign anything that restricts me from speaking about my experience," I continued, my voice steady. "You don't get to buy my silence." A tense stillness filled the room. One of their lawyers shifted, the scrape of his chair loud against the quiet. "Your story," Marianne said slowly, "could cause reputational harm. We'd prefer—" "You preferred firing me before my cliff," I replied. "You preferred targeting others the same way. You preferred keeping it quiet, but I'm done protecting the people who tried to erase me." The silence that followed cracked something open, the moment they realized they'd lost control not just of the situation, but of the narrative entirely. Ava leaned forward. "Here's what we want. Full equity, 12 months of severance, a year of benefits, no broad NDA, and policy revisions ensuring equity vests at the start of the calendar day. Retroactive compensation for every employee terminated near vesting in the last 3 years." Cole opened his mouth like he might object, then closed it when Marianne touched his arm subtly. Defeat disguised as diplomacy. "We can agree to those terms," she said. I nodded once. It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment. It was closure. They hadn't expected me to fight. They hadn't expected me to win. But I had. And now they had to live with what they'd tried to do. The settlement became official at 2:37 p.m., but the reality of it didn't hit me until hours later when I logged into my brokerage account and saw the numbers sitting there, real and immovable. $3.6 million. My name beside it. No conditions, no loopholes, no one left to threaten me. I sat at my kitchen table, fingers hovering over the keyboard, feeling a strange quiet settle into my bones. Not excitement, not relief, something deeper. Something like reclamation. Nova Forge unraveled quickly after that. Word spread inside the company faster than any memo they'd ever circulated. Cole resigned 6 weeks later, tucked inside a bland internal announcement about pursuing new opportunities. Everyone knew what it really meant. Marianne transitioned out shortly after, her early retirement masking the board's frantic attempt to stop the bleeding. Engineers I hadn't heard from in years emailed me, some thanking me, some asking how they could fight their own battles now that cracks had appeared in the company's armor. And then came the calls from the people who mattered most: Leo, Brianna, Marcus, Tessa. One by one, they told me what they'd endured: the pressure, the shame, the confusion they'd been made to feel. Ava helped each of them understand that the NDAs they'd signed did not, and never could, protect illegal conduct. They had leverage now. They had options. They had proof. A few months later, I left my old apartment for a small townhouse with sunlight pouring through every window. Nothing extravagant, just a space that didn't smell like working late nights and burnout. I bought a car that didn't rattle on hills. I replaced the couch I'd kept for too many years because I couldn't justify the expense. But I didn't run from my old life entirely. I kept the printed copy of my contract, the one with Ava's handwritten clause, as a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything I'd earned. And I kept the cardboard box from the night they fired me, tucked in a closet, because it reminded me of the exact moment the people in power revealed who they truly were. Now, I work with Ava part-time, reviewing employment contracts for engineers who don't have the luxury of learning the hard way. We fix clauses, we flag traps, we make sure nobody gets cornered in the dark. Sometimes I think about how easily things could have turned out differently if I'd trusted the wrong people or stayed quiet out of fear. But then I think about what I gained, not just the equity, but the clarity, the courage, the refusal to let someone else decide my worth again. They fired me before my cliff because they thought I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. I didn't realize how much strength I'd been carrying, quietly until everything collapsed at once. When Nova Forge tried to cut me loose the day before my vesting cliff, I thought I was walking into a loss I couldn't afford. But looking back now, I can see the truth clearly. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the small, unglamorous work I'd done years earlier, the long habit of documenting everything, keeping copies, asking questions, and refusing to sign anything I didn't fully understand. That preparation didn't feel powerful at the time. It felt paranoid, but in the moment I needed it most, it held the whole line. I also learned how often companies assume silence from people like me, quiet workers, steady workers, the ones who don't complain, don't threaten, don't make scenes. They mistake calm for weakness. They mistake professionalism for surrender. They never imagine that someone who keeps receipts might also keep their resolve. There was a cost, of course: the stress, the nights waiting for the clock to turn, the fear that maybe I'd missed something, misread something, miscalculated something. But underneath all of that, there was a steady pulse inside me saying, "You wrote this down. You saved this. You prepared for this moment long before they decided to come after you." If there's anything I'd tell a friend, it's this: your quiet habits matter. Your small acts of self-protection matter. And the strength you don't flaunt is often the strength that saves you. Actionable takeaways. Keep copies of every contract, clause, and performance review. Question every line that feels vague. Vagueness is where danger hides. Never apologize for protecting your own future. Calm is a power most people underestimate. How to get started today. Locate your employment contract and read it front to back. Highlight anything tied to timing, bonuses, equity, or termination. Save digital and physical copies in separate places. Keep a personal log of achievements and major contributions. When something feels off, document it immediately. What part of this story hit closest to home for you, and why?